1789, the United States Lighthouse Establishment, USLHT, was created and operated under the Department of the Treasury. All U.S. lighthouse ownership was transferred to the government, which became the General Lighthouse Authority. On July 1, 1939, the service merged with the United States Coast Guard, which took over the maintenance and operation of all U.S. lighthouses and lightships. Abbreviations: USLHS, U.S. Lighthouse Service, LHB, Lighthouse Board, LHD, Lighthouse District, USRCS, U.S. Revenue Cutter Service, USCG, U.S. Coast Guard, USN, U.S. Navy, USLHT. U.S. Lighthouse Tender, A-2-N. Aids to Navigation. This U.S. Lighthouse Tender was renamed U.S. Lighthouse Tender Coeur d'Alene in 1860. In this 1863 photo, during the Civil War, she was loaned to the U.S. Navy. U.S. Lighthouse Tender Shubrick. After the rebuild in the late 1860s, she was the first steam-powered lighthouse tender, and the first tender on the Pacific coast. Acquired from the Navy in June 1865 and commissioned U.S. Lighthouse Tender, Cactus, she served in the 2nd LHD, as a supply and inspector tender. Acquired from the Navy in October 1865 and commissioned U.S. Lighthouse Tender, Geranium, she served in the 8th LHD as an inspection tender. Verbena Class, Verbena and Alanthus. Verbena assigned to 2nd LHD at New Bedford for her entire career, as an inspection tender. It tended aids in Vineyard and Buzzards Bay. Alanthus was assigned to 6th LHD at Charleston, declared unfit in 1880, sold in 1881. Purchased and outfitted by the Lighthouse Service in 1870 for the use as supply and construction tender, commissioned as a U.S. Lighthouse Tender Warrington and served in the 11th LHD. Authorized July 15, 1870 as a tender for the Pacific Coast, she was ported at San Francisco and used as a supply tender. She was reassigned to the 3rd HD in 1873, relieving the Faroes. Mistletoe was authorized for service March 3, 1871. She was built as an engineer and tender serving in the 3rd LHD in Long Island Sound until 1922. It was built as an engineer and tender in the winter of 1871. He served in the 1st and 2nd Lighthouse Districts on a shared basis, homeported out of Boston. In April 1914 it was transferred from the 3rd Lighthouse District at New York to the 9th Lighthouse District in Puerto Rico. The Lily was the first tender specifically built for river service. She was built in Jeffersonville, Indiana. She was commissioned for service in the 14th Lighthouse District on the Upper Mississippi River. It was gutted by fire at Cincinnati, Ohio on September 20, 1864. It was repaired and put back into service. It sank near Washington, Missouri on October 17, 1911. Pansy was built as an inspection tender and assigned to the 8th Lighthouse District to replace the Dandelion. In 1904 she was transferred to Puerto Rico, then on the October 10 9 was laid up briefly, put back in service, was reassigned to the 3rd Lighthouse District and operated out of Staten Island, New York. Nettle was built as a small engineer and tender, and assigned to the 5th Lighthouse District. It built unmanned lights on Lake Champlain. In 1879 it was assigned to the 7th Lighthouse District and in 1883 it was reassigned to the 5th Lighthouse District. Holly was built in 1880 with a composite hull, as USLHT Holly and assigned as an inspection tender in the 5th LHD at Baltimore, Maryland, and Portsmouth, VA, servicing aids to navigation in the Chesapeake Bay. Pulled as a tender in June 1893 and used as a lightship on Wolf Trap Shoal and at Bush Bluff in 1894, then placed in reserve as a relief lightship. In 1898, it was rebuilt and restored to duty as a bay and sound tender, decommissioned and sold for $691 in 1931 after 50 years of service. Built as an inspection tender, serving in the 6th LHD at Charleston, South Carolina, it was reassigned to the 1st LHD in Portland, Maine, after 29 years of service, an exceptionally long period of time in those days. USLHT Wisteria was decommissioned in 1911 and replaced by the new USLHT Cypress. Medrano was built as a replacement for USLHT Shubrick, and used as an inspection tender on the West Coast. Only the 3rd tender on the West Coast, arriving in San Francisco in January 1886, relieving the USLHT Manzanita, which was then sent to replace the aging USLHT Shubrick in the 13th LHD. Commissioned 16 June 1888 as USLHT Gardenia. Its entire career was spent in the 3rd LHD as an inspection tender working New York Harbor. Built as a river tender, and planned as a replacement for USLHT Lily, specifically for service on the Ohio River, and commissioned as USLHT Goldenrod, it was the first stern-wheel tender built for the LHS. It was home-ported out of Cincinnati, Ohio, in the 14th LHD. Decommissioned and sold in 1924, it was replaced by USLHT Greenbrier. A tender for the Gulf Coast and was the last sail-powered lighthouse tender specifically built for the LHS, built and completed in September 1889, and commissioned as USLHT Clover in 1889. It was assigned to New Orleans in the 7th LHD. Transferred to the 4th LHD in December 1891. Commissioned as USLHT Thistle and used as an engineering tender in the 5th LHD at Baltimore, relieving the underpowered USLHT Knittle. Its career was mainly uneventful. Built as an inspection tender, the keel was laid on May 24, 1890. It was delivered on June 18, 1891, and assigned to the 2nd LHD at Woods Hole. In 1921, damaged in collision with a schooner in dense fog off Poliquip, but was repaired. Declared beyond economical repair in 1932, it was replaced by USLHT Myrtle. Built as an inspection tender, providing logistical support to lighthouses, assigned to the 11th LHD at Detroit for its entire career, servicing aids to navigation in Lake Superior and Lake Huron, later classed as a Bay and Sound tender. Amaranth was assigned to the 11th LHD at Detroit after commissioning, servicing lighthouses and buoys on Lake Superior. On October 5, 1901, USLHT Amaranth rescued a steamer near the rocks at Copper Harbor, MI, in Lake Superior, while supplying Passage Island Light Station in July 1920. The Bay and Sound tender, as it was now classed, was holed and it lost its rudder. It was repaired and placed back in service.